want to talk a bit about now is science. So what is science? I'm lucky I'm a scientist, but now I'm asking you, how would you define science?
I would define it as the search for answers to things that naturally occur.
Does it have to occur? Is it always science when it's something that occurs only?
No, it could be theoretical. So
it can be theoretical.
Nature, right?
Yep. And we wouldn't have a theory of relativity, general relativity, if it only would be the things that we can actually see. So theoretical science is a part of science, of course. But again, we want to generate knowledge and we have questions, but that's not enough. Everybody has that, or? Does that mean everybody's doing science? I say, as a scientist, I say no. But I'm biased. But what does a scientist do?
Scientists tries to answer questions for whatever he researched. So he basically tries to explain natural phenomena in the world.
So I agree that we need a question. Most science, but not all science, starts with a question. That's true. But then with the question, what do? We try to answer it. But what would be the scientific way to answer a question?
You try
never
to
what
make
you see in the TV.
an experiment to try to make your point or hypothesis.
Yeah, but you need to do something before you do the experiment, before you figure out what to do in an experiment.
You have to carry out observations, then make experiments, then make inferences or hypotheses before you're sure what you want.
Most science that we do needs a hypothesis. That's true. So why do we need a hypothesis before we can design an experiment? What is a hypothesis? Well, we start with a question, and the hypothesis is nothing but a preliminary answer to that question. So what you say is, I want to know how the cell converts energy, for instance. And what has to be done then is you come up with an idea how this could take place. And you could say, okay, my hypothesis is it breaks down glucose to carbon dioxide. That would be a potential answer to your original question. And that is what we call a hypothesis. It's a tentative answer to the original questions that you had. And then you can design an experiment. Why do you need a hypothesis to design an experiment?
In order to be able to test the data that you observe and collect.
Yeah, we're getting there.
I think the hypothesis is more like theoretical, while the experiment is more of the practice. Trying to practice what you think is the answer.
What does the experiment have to do with the hypothesis? There's only two options. But the experiment, you have to design the experiment in a way that it can either verify or falsify.
It can prove
your hypothesis.
It can prove your hypothesis wrong or incorrect or correct.
Exactly.
Right?
So both is scientific work. You either confirm your hypothesis with your experiment, or you say, okay, no, my hypothesis was wrong. So I need a new hypothesis. And this basically is already science. You ask a question, you pose a hypothesis, you design an experiment, you verify or falsify your hypothesis, and then you start again and again and again. And that is the classical way of doing research. Of course, the experiment has to be designed in a specific way. What do you think an experiment requires to be considered to be a scientific experiment? And now where it starts to deviate a lot from what you see on the TV or wherever. There's already something hidden in the slide here. It says something about controlled conditions. What would that mean?
You need a
What do you need
control group for an experiment.
You need a control. That is very much true. What could be a control?
A control group to compare.
Yeah, but if you have a control group, you need a second group, huh?
Yes.
And let me rephrase my question. What is a second group?
Yeah, experimental group, I think. I don't remember the exact name, but I know what you're talking about.
It can be very different things.
Observations.
Yeah, let's talk about patients. If you want to do an experiment with patients, what is your control group? Most of the time.
Maybe one group gets medicine and the other group does not get this medicine, and then you compare the two groups to each other?
Yep. That is one way of doing a controlled experiment. You have a group that receives a treatment and the other group that receives no treatment, or what you call a mock treatment or a placebo treatment. So they are treated in the same way, but they don't get the real, in this case, if we talk about a medication, they don't get the actual compound. So the patients, the control patients and the actual patients, they don't know who is in what group. And most of the time, you as a researcher try to blind yourself and you don't know who is in what group. So that any form of bias is eliminated to do such an experiment. That's something really important, because everybody of us is biased. And if you want to, or if you pose a hypothesis, then of course you want to prove your hypothesis. But that's very dangerous, because that makes you as a scientist biased. The same is true for medicine. If you treat a patient, you will always be biased if you have a form of attachment to the patient. Then your judgment is always biased. And the same is true for a scientific experiment. So control means you need to compare your treatment group in this example to a control group, which can be an untreated or one that is treated without the actual compound. There's another thing that is important for experiments, especially later, because if your experiments are successful and you have proved your hypothesis or you falsified it, you will want to publish that. And you will, because you want to publish it, means you tell it to the world. You give this to other scientists to maybe come up with their own experiments. But before you can do so, what is the next important thing in science, you think? You get your results and you are very happy with your results. Did you find the truth? There's no such thing as the truth. I want to say that beforehand.
I think you have to relate it to the population, how many people you questioned, to make it more sure.
Yeah, that is if you work with people, but maybe you work with bacteria or worms or flies.
Well, I think you find it so it repeats all the time and under the same circumstances, then it becomes a law.
Yeah, we're getting there. The next important thing really is it has to be repeatable. If you do the same experiment again, you will need to get the same result. Otherwise, it wasn't a true result. And not only if you repeat the experiment, also if anybody else repeats the experiment, it has to yield the same result. So it has to be repeatable. And that is also something really important in science. And only then it will be accepted, but it will never be accepted as a truth. There's no such thing as truth in science. Yeah? There's hypothesis, there's findings that confirm or falsify hypothesis, but never more. There's never such a thing as the truth. Knowledge is always in flow. And you will see that in medicine, when you sooner or later, hopefully sooner, finish your medical studies, the day you finish your medical studies, between 4 and 5 years later, half of the knowledge that you learned in your studies is gone. It has already been replaced. It's not the current state of the art anymore. So the half-life of knowledge in the medical field is about 4 to 5 years. And then you start again, which means, of course, if you work in the medical field, you will always have to continue learn and learn and learn, and get the knowledge about changes, updates, new findings in your field, and so on. So science is always in flow. No such thing as a truth. Although in medical science and medicine, there's no such thing as a truth. What is a correct treatment 20 years ago is not the correct treatment today anymore. And it will not be the correct treatment in 10 years. Everything is in flow.